Those of you who have come to me and be like, oh, Jack, you must be over the moon that OddsJam's selling for $80 to $160 million.
You don't stop people and say, it's Captain Jack, please.
Put respect on my name.
The Business of Betting podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. 4 out of the top 5 U.S. operators personalize player experiences with Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/businessofbetting. And if you like what you see, you will get your first month free.
What is up, everybody? I am Jason Trost, the host of the Business of Betting podcast. We are at episode 236 with Captain Jack, who's coming in from New Jersey. Thanks for joining the pod, Captain Jack.
Great to be here.
So, first of all, as long as I've known you, you've been Captain Jack. Why do you keep getting passed over for promotion?
I know, right? I should be at admiral status by now. Yeah. I actually have to clarify to some people that that's just a joke. It's not there's no military service in my background.
I still think with all the service that you've brought to the gambling industry, you're due for a promotion. At least I will recommend you for a promotion if anybody asks me.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know who Captain Jack is, you have a bit of the career I always feel like I should be having or I want to be having. You advocate for bettors in a way that I see very rarely done. Your interest is in trying to make sports betting fairer. You have your own company that helps people arb and learn about betting called Unabated. You're active with the regulation and trying to have, I guess, balanced regulation that is fair for operators and punters. So you've been around this space for years. I think you started as a card counter in casinos and then migrated to sports betting. It's been a remarkable career. If you look back on your career, what are some of your initial reflections? Because I'm in sports betting totally by accident. I used to be a stock trader and kind of ended up in sports betting. Did you ever think you were going to be in the gambling world?
No, I didn't. In fact, it was really an initial trip to Las Vegas for a bachelor party when I was 23. And I just kind of fell in love with the vibe. Now, the funny thing about that is I live just miles from Atlantic City. I grew up going to Atlantic City even before I was of the legal age. We would just go and hang out in the lobby and, try to look older. I don't know what the deal there was. But the Atlantic City vibe is nothing like the Las Vegas vibe. And anyone who's ever been to those two destinations absolutely knows that. And I fell in love with that Las Vegas vibe. And I said, how can I keep coming back here without it costing me a lot of money? And so I looked into how to win at casino games. And back then, the internet was very small and you got funneled in one direction. And that was towards card counting. And that was towards Stanford Wong. And he had this website back then called BJ21. And that's how I got into it. It was just seeking an edge that would help me be in casinos longer. Now, the funny thing about that, Jason, is today I can't stand to be in casinos. It just makes my skin crawl. But me 25 plus years ago, that was a desire of mine. And I've been seeking edges ever since.
Before you stepped into the casino, were you on the path to be an accountant? Did you run a video rental store? What was your previous life like?
I was in information technology. I was the director of IT at a law firm, a very large law firm. And I think that's also why I'm a little bit bent towards regulation and reading up on things like that. I don't want to give away too many secrets, but my firm represented the NFL. And at the time, the NFL was very much anti-gambling. And I was like, I'm going to read this brief. I'm going to read this, this study that not public record, probably shouldn't have been reading it. But it was things like that got me kind of interested in what logistics and legalities were behind PASPA and behind everything to do with the prohibition of sports betting at the time. And I really began to feel like, wow, this is a bad law. This is unprecedented law, one that requires the states to do something from the federal level, but then also requires the leagues to be the enforcer of this law. There's no other law where we say private business, you're the cops, you're the enforcer. And so it's just so messed up. And I was like, well, this is going to fall. Fast forward 20 years before it fell after my initial study into it.
So going from card counter to professional bettor, I guess finding edges in sports betting, which, there still abounds lots of different edges and different strategies. the thing I sort of think about you first and foremost is public advocacy, sort of on behalf of the punter. What made you want to jump from making money yourself to being very public about trying to advocate on behalf of the better? Because that I think is one of the big things that sets you apart from a lot of people that are in your shoes. Most people in your shoes are quite quiet about the money that they're making, not necessarily because it's illegal or anything like that. It's just they don't want to share the edge. The fewer competitors you have, the better, because the edge is finite and the amount of trading opportunities are finite. And the more the markets become efficient, theoretically, it hurts your position. So what made you want to sort of be public with this on the point of view of just sort of a good guy on Twitter talking about this stuff, as well as getting into the poaching business? I don't know if I'm going to use the gamekeeper turned poacher metaphor correctly, but, getting into the business of trying to publish some of these mispricings through your startup, Unabated.
So, okay, a lot to unpack there. Let me first start with why I became vocal on Twitter. And that was because I was on Twitter back 2009 or so, but I really didn't post anything until after PASPA fell. And the reason I did is because I was seeing how bastardized the sports betting industry was going to quickly become. It was quickly going to become these 4 or 5 companies that were going to take over everything. And I feel like they weren't treating people fairly. I tell the story. I got limited at DraftKings. They opened up in August of 2018 in New Jersey. And I was limited by September 1st, down to pennies. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't even know that was a possibility. I'm from New Jersey where they can't ban card counters. And so I was blown away that, I was just trying to find an edge here and I'm instantly limited. These days, everyone's like, duh, of course you're going to get limited. These companies aren't out to deal to sharp bettors. So that was the first reason I wanted to be vocal about it. The second reason was I felt like there was a lot more to know about sports betting than what was being told so far. And I'm happy to say that after 5 or 6 years, the conversation has evolved in the US. I don't know if it's at the level where it needs to be, but it's definitely evolved. And so I think I've helped move that conversation along. Now, the second part of your question was about talking about edges, when a lot of sharp bettors would say, you can't talk about edges. Look, I come from card counting, and the number one thing that a casino can do to make more money is to have people believe that they're beatable. And card counting is exhibit A in casinos letting you believe that you're beatable. Is card counting a good edge to have in a casino? No, it's like a 1 to 1.5% edge over the house with high variance because you're having to bet more in the higher counts. Casinos can easily spot it. They can easily counteract it. And the majority of card counters are not any good at doing it. They lose the count halfway through the shoe, or they're just not disciplined enough to get the right bet amount out there. So you take all those factors together, and now where I said card counting, apply it to sports betting. And that's true as well, because there are so many people out there that are just not disciplined enough to be a sharp sports bettor. The best thing a sportsbook can do is to convince you that they can be beaten. And it's very hard to do in the aggregate for anyone that's trying to practice it. And the other thing about it is there are more edges in sports betting, infinitely more edges in sports betting than there ever was in card counting. Card counting is just one single edge. When the deck gets rich, you bet more. With sports betting, there's so many edges, so many sports. And the surface area, Jason, is always expanding. These sportsbooks love to find new ways for you to bet, which create new ways for you to beat them.
So going back to the card counting thing, what other ways does a casino have to protect themselves, but except throwing you out of the casino? I guess they add more decks to the shoe. Is that the other mechanism, or they shuffle the deck every, a lot more often? What mechanisms does the casino have to protect themselves?
And they have a lot of different mechanisms, from limiting how much you can bet. You spread your bet. They could say, you can only bet $5 and you can't bet more than $5. But the point is, they don't need to do anything. Card counters are such a small slice of the spectrum of customers that they get through the door, and the number of them that can do it well is minimal. I would say it's less than the number of sharp sports bettors that are in the world. And they would be fine just dealing the game and not having to pay any attention to the card counters. Because if they were to do something like move the cut card up to halfway through the shoe, well, that limits the number of hands that they get from the 6 other players at the table. And those 6 other players are operating at a minus 3.5% edge, and your card counter is operating at a plus 1.5% edge. And you can do the math right there. They make more money from the losers than they stop the card counter making from that table. So it's the same as sports betting, right? Because there's a lot of things in sports betting where if the sports book were to just ignore the sharp bettors and, let them have their pound of flesh, they would end up profiting more.
So you said you were worried that there was going to be 4 bookmakers that was going to rule them all and customers were going to get the shit treated. They were going to get treated very badly. And it seems like you were too optimistic. And now there's 2 giants and customers are treated like shit. So what's your take on how things are going?
It's not going well. I don't think we're, in the death spiral for sports betting. I think there's still a lot of possibility out there. And I think competition is always what's going to breed innovation. So I always take a capitalistic approach to the industry. I think we need to encourage more capitalism, encourage more competition. But you need to get that message through to the regulators. And beyond the regulators, you need to get it through to the legislators who write the laws that then the regulators enforce. And that's been a difficult path. And that's, if I had a time machine to go back to 2018, I would have been more involved in getting a seat at the table with the legislators rather than with the bettors. I thought I was being the voice of the bettors and that it would echo up to the halls of where the laws are made. And it didn't. And what did echo through were the lobbyists and the people that knew how to pay for a voice. I didn't know anything about that then. Rufus Peabody and I started a nonprofit advocacy group for the bettors in February 2020, right on the heart of the tip of the pandemic. And we quickly found out, nobody wants to give you money. The bettors don't want to give you money. The sports books don't want to give you money. We actually had a very good Rufus had won the National Sports Betting Championship that DraftKings had presented, and they really screwed him out of the win by not grading his bet in time for him to bet on the final game of the series. And there was talk of a settlement that DraftKings wanted to give him. And Rufus said, okay, in lieu of that settlement, just put it towards this nonprofit that we're forming. And it's an advocacy group for bettors. Everybody wins. And DraftKings said, no, we're not going to support that. We'd rather just give you the money. And DraftKings said, we think there's enough advocacy for bettors out there right now, which obviously there wasn't. There still isn't. So we failed with our nonprofit, mostly because we couldn't get funding and it was just too big of a hill to get up. Now, fast forward to now, and there's another one out there that Spanky has created, the American Bettor's Voice, and they're trying to do the same thing. And I think they're facing similar headwinds. It's a really tough thing to rally the bettors because we're all selfish pricks. Sports bettors are just so self-absorbed and they don't want to help everybody else. They don't want to help, even if it benefits them. They just don't want to help. So it's a tough road right now in order to find better advocacy. And it really has to remain grassroots in order to have any function.
You mentioned that you listen to the podcast from time to time. Did you get a chance to check out the Bill Pasquale episode?
I did, yes.
So he had that was very illuminating for me. And he basically said we got the deal that was possible and that the political landscape at the time basically ensured that the solution that New Jersey ended up with was the one that was the only one that was going to pass. With the benefit of hindsight and listening to that podcast, do you agree with that assessment? Or do you think there was a role for the Captain Jacks of 2018 to stand up and lobby more to the legislature to kind of push things a different direction?
No, I think Bill, Joe Brennan, the people that were really behind that got the best deal they could. Senator Lesniak, obviously, as well. They got their door inward through Lesniak. And look, New Jersey was going to be a tough fight because it's hard-coded in the Constitution of New Jersey. They needed constitutional amendment in the state, which can only come from better referendum. And people of the state they're not as gambling crazy as you would think they would be. A few years later, they tried to amend the Constitution again to permit wagering on college sports that happen within the state, because that was kind of carved out just as a safety mechanism at the start. And they couldn't get that passed. So, no, I think they did a decent job. Now, where New Jersey screwed up was 1994. They had a 1-year window to exempt themselves from PASPA. And I talked to Roxy Roxborough, who, when PASPA came down, he started looking for houses in New Jersey because he figured the center of the sports betting world was going to move to New Jersey. They were going to exempt themselves. And because it's East Coast time, that would just be the natural place where everything would originate from. Vegas would take a backseat to the sports gambling mecca of Atlantic City. Well, it never happened. And the reason it never happened, and this is fairly public record, is it was also the year of a gubernatorial election in New Jersey. And the Republicans were afraid that putting this on the ballot would allow more Democrats to come out to vote because they figured this was more of an urban issue of legalizing gambling. And they didn't want to get that on the ballot because they think they had a good shot of upsetting the current governor, which is Jim Florio, with Christy Todd Whitman. And they were right because they did squeak out a small Republican victory in New Jersey, which is not an easy thing to do either. And as a result, sports betting didn't get pushed to be a public ballot referendum in the 1 year they had to pass it. And New Jersey had to wait 24 years.
It's amazing how small things like that can have such a big impact on the state. I think Bill Bradley was a senator who pushed for PASPA.
Mm-hmm.
He's from New Jersey, right?
Yeah, he is.
So he didn't play a role in sort of kicking the can down the road for New Jersey and saying, hey, watch your stuff. I imagine he was involved in that a little bit as well.
Sure. I'm sure that had an impact as well. Yeah. But, it was definitely trying to control that vote heading into the gubernatorial election year. Had that PASPA been passed a different year, that wouldn't have been a factor. And maybe Bill Bradley would have had some weight in the issue, but it's tough to say. It's, we need the DeLorean to go back and see that.
Run our counterfactuals. That's very interesting. So you were saying the antidote to this shitty situation we have in sports betting in the U.S. is capitalism. And I will say that, as you've probably heard me rant before, as one of the few small operators in the United States, it's incredibly, incredibly expensive to get to market. The regulatory burden costs us millions of dollars per year. The market access costs us millions of dollars per year. It's insane the amount of quote unquote table stakes you need just to sort of get to the table, let alone to market to your customers, to build product, it's really a shame. And I think there's a very deep unappreciation of the fact that with the lack of choice, ultimately consumers are going to get ripped off. And that's in my opinion, what's happening now. One of the big reasons, which I imagine you're very sympathetic to, is the reason the customers are getting ripped off is because they don't understand the value of these bets. There's not enough competition to kind of push prices down. And ultimately consumers are paying about 10 to 13% to place each bet in a blended kind of edge. Where do you stand on the ethical debate of, should bookmakers be allowed to rip people off, or should there be restrictions on the edge that bookmakers should have?
I would probably say there shouldn't be a restriction, but there should be a little bit of disclosure of what the house edge is in the situation. We've seen it in other forms of gambling. It's pretty well known what the house edge is in a lot of casino games. The lottery is pretty upfront with how they operate. That's a massive house edge, and they're very upfront with it. I don't think it would drive away people from making bad bets. They just seem to, make bets that defy reason sometimes. And it's all because they have that lottery fever themselves. They want the big payout for a little money. So I would like to see a little bit more acknowledgement that the odds offered are often with a fairly high house edge, a double-digit house edge. But at the same time, that's also not the responsibility of the operator to safeguard the consumer to only have them bet into a single-digit edge. It's really the responsibility of the consumer to know, to be a knowledgeable consumer and understand what they're getting into. Look, I've been trying to teach that for years. I make YouTube videos. I have various posts and articles kind of peeling back the curtain of what's going on. And they get hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube, but I'm not seeing much of an impact in how people bet. And that's because the sea is large and I'm one guy here with a cup trying to bail it out,
And a twinkle in your eye, if I might add. So do you think bookmakers should be allowed to ban people for winning or limit their stakes down to pennies? Do you think that should be permitted under legislation?
I mean, obviously, I think the current system is not working for anyone. And I think it's not working for the sustainability of sports betting. It's not working for regulators, but they just don't know it yet. Look, sports betting exists on a spectrum, and every conversation we could have about sports betting is going to have nuance to it, right? So when you have this conversation, everyone goes to the extreme ends of this spectrum when they talk. The sports books say, man, if we let everybody bet whatever they wanted, all the sharp bettors would come in betting hundreds of millions of dollars per game, and we'd go bankrupt right away, and all people would lose their jobs. Well, we know that's not true. A lot of sports bettors I know are fairly risk averse. They're nerdy guys that, like want to deal with the math of something. They don't necessarily want to deal with the mass riches of being smarter with the math than everybody else. So on the other end of the spectrum is the sports books also limit you to pennies, as you said. And that's almost punitive, because now we have these multi-billion-dollar corporations who probably spend more on advertising on the D train than they do on what they take from sharp bettors. And they could totally take a more respectable stake. And that's where, when people start talking about minimum bet limits, that's kind of the angle they're going at, is that create a limit that is respectable to the player, but is what the sportsbook can bear. But the trouble is, Jason, that answer greatly varies across the sportsbooks, because the sportsbooks exist on the spectrum. What Smarkets could take, let's just say what SBK could take, because we're talking more on the B2C consumer. What you could take is different than what a DraftKings or a FanDuel can take, or what a Prime, or what maybe a smaller operator, Betfred, if they're still around. It's a sliding scale. And that's where it becomes very difficult to decide where is the true delicate balance of the situation.
Yeah, I think my opinion so far is that it's unethical, but it shouldn't necessarily be illegal. But I think they should be named and shamed a little bit for this behavior. Not a little bit, a lot of it. And to me, it just blows my mind for the amount of money that's in this industry, the sophistication around it, which I know that you're very sympathetic to this view, is very, very low. And I think one of the cardinal sins is that everybody has put mentally sports betting alongside casino. Like, everybody thinks about it, like you're playing dice, basically. Like, nobody goes to Vegas thinking they're going to come out making money. It's just some stupid game that you play when you're drunk and trying to win a little bit of cash. And they don't realize that sports betting, it's closer to NASDAQ than it is to roulette. It's like, yes, you're dealing with chance, but you're basically buying and selling binary options on future events. And, it's like weather futures, and there's a sophistication to it, or there can be a sophistication to it. And the way it's treated right now, it's like you might as well be playing, a casino game, which is just, it really confuses me.
Yeah. One extra point to that, it is absolutely like a market. It is advertised like a market. It's advertised that if you're smart enough, if you have the sports knowledge, you can win. This is a game of skill. Yet it's not presented as a game of skill. It's presented as a game of chance when you get down to what the limits are and how the odds are offered. And they need to make a decision. They need to decide, is sports betting a game of chance or a game of skill? And if it's a game of skill, and I believe it absolutely is, well, it needs to be regulated and marketed like a game of skill, in that you can win. Look, the stock market is incredibly hard to beat. The market is highly efficient. That doesn't mean that you can't beat it with the right angle. That doesn't mean that you can't win. And nobody's saying that about the stock market. So yeah, look, I don't think the sports betting is a stock market, but it absolutely operates more of one than a slot machine or the big six wheel.
So I believe you testified to the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. I believe that was public record. I didn't get a chance to review your testimony, but what was that like? What was that like, speaking in front of, one of the bigger states and talking to them about what to do? Were they receptive to your ideas?
So they held a roundtable about the process of limiting. This was the first roundtable they held, and this is the one where the operators all refused to appear because they didn't want to disclose their intellectual property. So it was really myself, Brianne, Dustin Gauker, and unfortunately it was a bit of an echo chamber because we all were saying essentially the same thing without any kind of roundtable rebuttal from the sports books involved. The MGC, look, they love to discuss things. They just talk and talk and talk,
Okay.
as been evidenced. And I don't know how much of it was absorbed. Now, they had a subsequent roundtable that I wasn't asked to speak to, where they had a different panel, which I think is good because you need to kind of have a more of a cross sample. And the sports books, having been rebuked for their last no-show, did show up, but they were held 2 different sessions. So in other words, they held the sports books one time, and then they held the people that know in the other session. Now, interestingly, last week, Massachusetts legislator introduced a bill that everyone has jumped on and said, well, look, this is why you can't talk about limiting, is because we end up with bills like this. And the bill essentially is draconian. It has affordability checks that say you can't deposit more, you can't wager more than 1/3 of what you have in your bank account at the time. You can't wager in-game, you can't wager on props. All these really ridiculous laws. Look, this didn't come from the MGC. This came from lobbying. This has Charlie Barker of the NCAA written all over it. This is Charlie Baker, rather. This is not something that has been the result of the MGC's hearings. In fact, the MGC is very upfront when saying they enforce the law. They don't write the law. So anyone who thinks that the laws are going to change from the MGC doesn't understand how things work in Massachusetts. So so the MGC, I think they do a good job of presenting things and highlighting things that maybe need to be public record, but I don't think they're the agents of change.
So is there a solution here, or are we just going to muddle through for the next 20 years?
Oh, I think we're going to muddle. I mean, I just don't see...
I thought so.
I don't see anyone taking the right approach to this. Look, and if you did get the right approach, you've conquered one state. There's now 38 others that you need to conquer. And from trying to be an operator, it's tough to scale across the U.S. It's like conquering 50 different states, 51. So look, I think the way it is the way it is. We just need a little bit more enlightenment, a little bit more public pressure to have operators and regulators operate in a way that is fair. Because really, Jason, what this comes down to is greed, right? And that's why we have regulators, is because if we didn't, we have unfettered greed. And that's not good. Sorry, Gordon Gekko. You need to be able to balance things out. It's more like the Federal Reserve needs to balance out our economy so that it doesn't grow too fast. Well, in the case of sports betting, growing too fast is greed. And if you get any one side that gets too greedy, the whole thing collapses. It doesn't become a sustainable product for the operators if they're too greedy. It doesn't become a sustainable product for the bettors if they're too greedy. And that's why I'm glad when you introduced me, you talked about me being fair for both bettors and operators, because that's what I really want. I want this level of balance that allows everyone to be sustainable. As a sharp bettor, I can be sustainable as long as the sports betting industry doesn't fall upon itself, which I'm afraid it might. And as an operator, and you know this, as an operator, you just need a little bit of a window. Give me a little bit of a break to be innovative and capitalize on this segment that I can get in touch with. And that's how, other exchange operators are trying to make it. And that is why the sweepstakes business has risen up, is because, they've been shut out by the regulators. It's too damn expensive. And now they have this other way to do things, but we don't have regulators, and we're going to get unfettered greed in the sweepstakes industry eventually.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Pivoting to your startup, how's that going? Like, I saw that OddsJam got acquired for, some kind of $100 million buyout. How's your startup going? Do you want to sell? Are you happy with it? Is advocacy working? What's going on with Unabated?
Yeah. So, Unabated is a tools and resources site. It's a picks and shovels site for sharp bettors, for aspiring sharp bettors, those who want to raise their game. We have a lot of tools that people couldn't come up with on their own. A lot of data science that Rufus has developed, a lot of calculators that heretofore weren't in the industry. And I think that's very good for bettors who are trying to raise their game. I'm happy with it. We're doing very well. The OddsJam sale is a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, because while we have a similar site to OddsJam, a lot of the OddsJam site was Optic Odds, which was their B2B product. And that's what was really being purchased there by gambling.com. So it's not really, those of you who have come to me and be like, oh, Jack, you must be over the moon that OddsJam selling for $80 to $160 million. Good for them. Good for them. They fought a hard fight.
You don't stop people and say, it's Captain Jack, please.
But respect to my name. I absolutely think it was good for them. It's probably good for us, but I don't think it's setting a benchmark of where we value Unabated at. Look, I think Unabated has a ton of value in the intellectual property that we have with our data science. I think that's the moat that separates us from the rest of the industry. I probably shouldn't say that too loudly because I only encourage competition on that when I do, but I absolutely think that our data science is second to none, and there's a lot of knowledge that still needs to be learned on both sides of the counter when it comes to the data science of sports betting.
And like, can you share like numbers, like revenue, subs?
I probably should not share any of that just because, as a private company, and
You don't want to tease any number out there? How many employees you got?
we have 30 plus employees. I think we're right around the 30 number. So I can
Okay.
say that,
All right.
which is
All right.
it's a healthy startup.
That is pretty healthy.
We're providing health benefits this year to employees.
Shit. All right. 401k plan or not yet?
No 401k yet. As a professional gambler, as a Schedule C filer in the U.S., the benefits of having a solo 401k in the U.S. are tremendous. And anyone who's a professional gambler out there who doesn't do a solo 401k, you absolutely should look into that. It's a great tax saving.
What are the benefits? It's just sort of, you just save. Is it like a double tax saving kind of thing?
Well, you can deduct about 25% of your income and put it into a solo 401k. So there's a 25% reduction right there. The qualified business income deduction in the US is another 25% savings. So now you've deducted about 50% of your income. Now, of course, there are ceilings to these things. The QBID deduction is a hard ceiling. In other words, you go above it, you get none of it. But the 401k deduction is a soft ceiling where you get up to that point and you get the benefit of it. So for a self-employed person, there are a lot of tax savings out there. Plus, you can then deduct all of your expenses as a professional gambler. So,
and while we're on the topic, what do you, as a professional sports bettor, what do you pay tax? Like, is it ordinary income? Is your tax? Do you pay ordinary income on your tax P&L, your gambling P&L?
Right. It's a pass-through company. So in other words, it becomes my personal income and then is taxed at the various tax brackets in the U.S. The difference is I also pay a self-employment tax, which is my half of Social Security, the employer half of Social Security as well, and then the employer half of the Medicare tax. So that adds up to about another 17%. So, a lot of people out there thinking, wow, an extra 17% tax is pretty rough. But when you have all of those deductions that you can take, it works out to be okay. It's still painful every year to write a huge check and then get told later that you didn't pay enough because you filed for an extension and you still have to pay the interest in the meantime.
Are you familiar with the tax rate for professional gamblers in the UK?
0. Yeah.
It still blows my mind. You know what the rationale for it is?
Because they probably don't win, right?
Yeah, well, they don't want people to be able to deduct your losses. So if I lose 20 grand betting, I can deduct that from my income in the US, right? Or no?
You can deduct up to the point of your winnings, so you can't have a net loss. I have to declare my gross income and then declare my gambling losses against that. And the way the IRS kind of structures that is very obtuse. I get a lot of questions every year about taxes. But basically, you need to declare your gross winnings and deduct your losses against that, but it can't go below 0. It used to be you could deduct your expenses and go below 0, but they closed that loophole in 2021. And honestly, like if you're a professional gambler, you obviously will probably have a profit. I would never want to write my taxes and not show a profit. I feel like that's just going to cause too many questions. Is why is a professional gambler yet 0? That just doesn't add up. So
the rationale I heard is that the UK HMRC, I don't know if the principle, like how it maps to the American tax law, but they didn't want, if you lose £5,000 betting, they didn't want somebody to be able to take £5,000 and deduct it from their income. So that they just said it's not part of your income statement because they figured more people lose than win, and the HMRC would net lose money by taxing gambling winnings, which I thought was interesting. I was very curious when I came across your Masterclass. I got a smile on my face. It feels very off-brand for Masterclass, and this isn't necessarily a knock on you. It's more like Masterclass, at least from the branding I've seen, is like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair and sort of these sort of erudite figures who are kind of or like, I don't know who did the film one, but like Steven Spielberg or whatever. Now we have gambling. What was it like doing that experience, and how did they find you? And are you happy with how it came out?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because this was kind of interesting. Look, I wouldn't pick myself to be the face of a masterclass on sports betting. absolutely wouldn't. And that's what I said to them when they first approached me. They had approached other people and other people had turned them down. And I'm not going to name names, but you can kind of in your head think of like who the Mount Rushmores are of sports betting. But the other thing here is Masterclass is doing a little bit of a paradigm shift in some of their classes in that it's not necessarily the celebrity name. It is subject matter experts that are all come together and have sort of like a conglomerate that talks about that topic. They have one on brain health. They have one on gut health that is very much people you've never seen before but they understand what they're talking about and they kind of walk you through the whole thing. The other thing that's different with our masterclass than others is this is one single class. This isn't a long course. Daniel Negreanu's course on poker is like 17 hours. It just blows my mind. This is very much 1 hour of understanding what sports betting is and what sports betting isn't. And I'm really happy with the way it turned out because if you were a 22-year-old, I could sit you down in front of this episode. It would keep your attention and it would also explain sports betting in a way that when you walk away from it, you go, I get it. I get that it's a market. I get that there are some things out there that are poorly priced. I get that I shouldn't bet into these same game parlays and things like that because they're more of a lottery topic. They did a good job with the editing. And that was my main concern is we didn't have a script. The 6 of us were filmed separately, different days, in fact. So we didn't know what other people had said. And they basically just gave us a list of topics, talked almost like as if we were doing this podcast now, and filmed it. And then they edited it from that. And I think they did a decent job of presenting sports betting in a very fair light. Now, unfortunately, since Masterclass is behind a $6 paywall, most sports bettors out there won't pay $6 for anything, and they don't watch it. They're just going to criticize it. And so the criticism was that this was some kind of cash grab that Captain Jack was doing. And look, it definitely wasn't a cash grab. The amount that they pay for this is, it was barely worth my time and effort. But I wanted to put something out there at a high production quality. I make YouTube videos, I do podcasts. Production quality is paramount to me, and sometimes it's beyond what I can even do. So to have this incredible studio setup, there must have been 50 people on set for the 8 hours that I was there filming that day. And they have professional light, professional sound, professional wardrobe. They do it all. And I thought that was an incredible opportunity to make something permanent that could be out there that I'm fairly proud of, that explains sports betting to people that are just getting into it. So I really thank Masterclass for putting it out there. I don't think they were ready for the backlash that it got. It did get a lot of negative backlash from people that are anti-gambling, that don't want to see gambling on Masterclass, as well as the gambling Twitter that just likes to, hate on everything.
Should I pay $6 and check it out?
If you checked it out, you would show it to other people and say, hey,
Okay.
this is how sports betting really works. This is a good 1 hour overview of how it should be done. That's what I found is that a lot of people that have seen it have said, oh, I showed this to my son. I showed this to a colleague. This explains it so well in 1 hour.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll check it out and I'll let you know if I agree with that. So how does that work monetarily? They give you a fixed fee and that's that? Or do you get residuals every time it's played or?
Yeah, no, it was just basically an appearance fee. And,
And they own your image forever and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I believe I signed a contract that says I cannot replicate the masterclass at any time, which is fine. I teach things on YouTube and I cleared it with their legal, like, oh no, that's different. This would be if you had a professional studio and talked about the same exact things you talked about on Masterclass. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Where was the studio? Was it in New York City or?
It was Hollywood. It was Charlie Chaplin's old studio in the Hollywood Hills. It was amazing. That part of it was just mind-boggling to me. I had to like a 6 a.m. call, show up. They got all these wardrobe people. They got, this big cavernous studio where they had created a set. It was, that part of it, I would have paid to just experience that, of being the talent on stage for the day, and everybody's kind of working to your whim. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got a chance to see, but I filmed a TV ad like 2 years ago and I got that experience. It is quite a life bucket issue. I think we had 50, 60 people on set. Just blows you away like how much work goes into making 30 40, 50 seconds of content, like the lighting and the sound and the cameras and then the set. And then you need people to take care of the set. And it's crazy.
Yeah.
Does Masterclass film all the things in this one studio, or do they change it as their needs move around?
From what I understand, they have different production crews. And so this is just one of their crews that operates in this
Got it.
studio. So they filmed here before, they'll film here again, but they definitely just have a massive operation. It blew my mind how big Masterclass is. They've existed
Yeah.
for years. Everyone's heard of them. People have watched episodes. I didn't
Yeah.
realize just how massive the whole operation is. It was quite impressive.
Yeah, very cool. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about exchanges. Any hot take on exchanges, or what do you think? Like small niche tool for professionals, or do you think it should be more widespread?
I think it's growing. I think the future of exchanges is getting really hot. Look, like it or not about the sweepstakes model is what it enabled Profit to do, what it enabled Novig to do is a bit of a game changer, right? It takes some of their friction away. And when you take their friction away, you take the sports bettors' friction away, because now they can operate in that super low hold commission margin setup. And it's catching on. And what's catching on is a lot of the flexibility of exchanges. There's been a lot of chatter about LeBron and his streak of scoring 10 plus points in a game that goes back like 53 years now or something. And that becomes like a nightly bet. And people are willing to lay into like a minus 6,000, 60 to 1 to 60. And they like to brag about it, and they like to, it's a lot of chatter, and it's getting a lot of almost FOMO created for people that like, well, I don't bet on exchanges, I bet on DraftKings, but these guys keep talking about this Profit and this Novig, and I guess I'll check it out. I guess I'll try this app. Like that's something exchanges haven't had heretofore because they've been very much targeted towards the professional. They've been targeted towards the bettor who understands the price sensitivity. And now they're attracting bettors that don't even understand price sensitivity. They just want the ability to have this wager that's not available anywhere else. Now, in a regulated market, it's tougher to do these little crazy little wagers because you got to clear it through the regulator and all that. But I do think there is a chance for exchanges. The CFTC has shown some cracks in their facade of late. And I think that, the pressure being put on by Polymarket, by Kalshi, it's just getting to a point where something could happen in the next 4 years when it comes to the regulation of exchanges. And I said this to Alex Kane from the start. I said, if the CFTC ever cracks, you guys are in the best position because you've kind of been here waiting for this sort of thing to happen. We could have a US-wide exchange market without having to deal with the states, without having to deal with the market access, without having to deal with licensing. You're nodding your head because, Jason, I know you understand this. You've seen this. This is why you're still in it. It could happen.
Yeah. Well, it would be a wonderful world if it did happen. So I like your optimism that that's in the realm of possibility. I'm a little bit more circumspect that we'll get there. The CFTC thing's quite interesting, though. I've been looking at that. So we'll see. My take on exchanges is that they'll be the sort of the infrastructure layer of all sports betting going forward, so that eventually, like DraftKings, FanDuel, all these guys will need to be sitting on top of an exchange because markets will move too fast, margins will get compressed, and they won't have the technology to price sports anymore. That's sort of my take on the future of exchanges, but I would love to see them play more of a BDC role as well, and interested to see if the sweepstake model holds like it looks like it's going to right now. Great. Well, thanks for stopping by. What do you want to be when you grow up?
At this point, I want to be retired. I've been doing this grind for 20 plus years, 25 years. And I told you before we aired that I went down to Key West for a week, and man, it just feels like the island life is what's for me. So maybe someday, I know a lot of professional gamblers that have retired multiple times because they get out and they just find their way back in. I look forward to one day getting out and not having the temptation to get back into it later. So that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be retired.
Key West is a lovely part of the world, as we were saying before we aired. I brought a bar singer, John Lemaire, who was fantastic. Flew him out to my wedding in Paris and had a wonderful memory of that. Well, Captain Jack, thanks for stopping by. I can't believe I've never had you on the podcast. And, bettors around the world should tip their cap to you. I think the work that you do and the advocacy that you do really helps. And I hope you keep pushing the message as long as you don't retire, because there aren't enough of you and enough of us that are kind of trying to make sports betting more fair for everybody, and it should be. So anyway, thanks for the work that you do. Thanks for stopping by, and best of luck.
Thank you, Jason.
The Business of Betting podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. 4 out of the top 5 U.S. operators personalize player experiences with Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/businessofbetting. And if you like what you see, you will get your first month free.